Welcome to Norse Code, the number one podcast for your Minnesota Vikings. I'm your host with the moster, Dusty O'Connell. Joining me across the tin can and string that is the internet, Minnesota Vikings blogger extraordinaire and all-around useful human, Arif Hassan. How you doing, Arif?
Doing all right. I just saw the United States get blown out of the water by a vastly superior team, so there's like a limit to how all right I can be, but otherwise pretty good.
That's fair. I mean, nobody really honestly expected the United States to win in a match semifinal with Argentina. That seems a little ludicrous if you're talking about European football, which in this instance we are.
Right. I didn't expect the United States to win, and in fact, I even put money on Argentina to win because the odds were so delicious. They opened at money line negative 200. By the time I was able to get a bet in, it was at negative 230. Those odds are way too good, 2-1 odds that are slightly worse than 2-1 odds that Argentina was going to win. Like, are you serious? Yeah, I'm taking that every time.
Where would you have been hesitant to put money on them? Like 10-1?
10-1. I think at 6-1 or something like that. Because I was thinking about this earlier. I was like, well, the win is so assured that my brain starts thinking of certainty instead of probability, right? I mean, because that's what human brains do. And so I'd have to figure it out. I think 6-1 is where I'd be like, yeah, I could put money on a draw, or even on the United States, because, you know, the concurrent odds on 6-1. But yeah, 2-1, I just put all the money I could on them. Free
money was had today by Arif Hassan, Vikings blogger and apparently gambler extraordinaire. Or at least odds analyst and remover of self extraordinaire. Right. It's very, very zen approach to gambling. Zen and the Art of Sports Gambling by Arif Hassan. Coming this summer to an Amazon Kindle near you.
That was a good book, the motorcycle repair one, right?
It was all right. I mean, philosophically, it was very like introductory level, like discussion of idealism. But for an introduction to philosophy, it was remarkably accessible and if you were a teenager and you read it, you were pretty much guaranteed to feel enlightened by the time you were done.
Yeah, that's when I read it. So
I think that's when everybody should. Yeah. That's there we go.
Sorry, is this a football podcast?
What?
My bad.
Wait, are we recording?
Oh crap!
Oh man! Oh well. I suppose this would be a good time to mention that Norse Code is sponsored by listeners like you, specifically listeners like Honeymoon Fund, who did not include their name with their PayPal donation, but they did send us $41 for, and I quote, 11 months of Loch Ness Monster-free podcasting, plus $2.50 because that's what I had left over. So
appreciate the leftovers.
Yeah, and the rest. The Loch Ness Monster remains in, I guess, Loch Ness for the time being. Thanks to you, Honeymoon Fund. Also, Kevin Sayer, a frequent question asker and a commiserator with us on the Twitter, sends in $10 with no message. But I can tell you that I am privy to a Twitter conversation between myself and him earlier this week. And I can tell you that he fully supports the glass case of emotion as a nickname for US Bank Stadium.
Oh, and I do like the idea of like a sideline reporter, reporting live from the glass case of emotion.
Oh, exactly. Can you imagine just like a bunch of young guys from ESPN, like practicing their fake mustache game, like getting spirit gum all over themselves just so they can go full Ron Burgundy when they're on the sideline? That'd be great.
I mean, yeah. I'm just saying it's a mouthful. That's all. But yeah, it would be fun.
I'm going to leave all opportunities for jokes by the wayside in order to suggest that you become a member of Norse Code by either contributing once, as both Honeymoon Fund and Kevin Sayer did, by going to paypal.me/Norse Code, giving us a one-time contribution in an amount of your choice. Or you can go to patreon.com/Norse Code, our preferred method of sponsorship, where you can become a recurring member and contribute any amount you like on a monthly basis. It just is automatically debited from your account. So feel free to flip us, about $3.50 a month if you feel like it. It's not much. And it goes a long way to doing things like paying for our shiny new website, paying for a portable Wi-Fi connection for Arif to take to training camp, given the lessons we learned from the last 3 seasons. And
finally learned over the course of 3 seasons.
Well, I mean, I would like to think that we learned it after the first 1 or 2, and then it was just a question of, us not being able to afford to, send you to Winter Park with internet. Like you would think the internet is just like in the air around you or in the hotel you're staying at. But now, thanks to our dedicated listenership and the numerous people who contribute via Patreon, it's possible for us to budget for this sort of thing in advance. So your Norse Code schedule will not be interrupted throughout training camp this year. Thanks to people like Kevin Sayer, Honeymoon Fund, and the other, it's probably 50-odd people who have contributed to the show over the last few years, which is...
It's definitely been like a number of contributors. Thank you, by the way, everyone.
It's amazing. Usually podcasts and other, free to use but contributions requested media average about 0.5% to 1% of their listenership contributing at any given time to the actual operation of the project. And I am happy to report that our ratio is much higher than that, which I think goes to show how dedicated our community is to receiving this awesome product week in and week out.
Yeah, absolutely. We appreciate the commitment, because I think the amount of commitment that we got is not something that I know that we expected to come this early or this quickly. And I mean, it's fantastic to see.
Oh yeah, it's definitely been a surprise to me to see how successful our various campaigns have become, and it's great for me because now we've got a little bit of money in the bank to do fun things like promote your training camp guide more heavily, and get you better equipment to report in and kind of truck around the training camp experience with your own little personal jetpack, tapping away on your laptop, as we all know you like to do. So the theme of the show the last few weeks, we've had some pretty great guests on. We've kind of been trying to catch up with the rest of the NFC North after the rather winsome drubbing we served to them last season, to kind of see how the rest of the division is going to shape up and kind of change how they react to the Vikings' eventual domination of them. But we did a good job talking Packers once we finally got Justice Mosqueda on the show. We went over the Lions last week. This week, we were hoping to get somebody on to talk Bears, but I guess it's a little harder for us to make inroads into the Bears blogging community. So this week's Chicago Bears expert is going to be Minnesota Vikings blogger extraordinaire Arif Hassan.
It me, Bears expert.
And I guess I figured we could kind of break it. So the Bears have made a lot of changes in the offseason. They finished last season 6-10. That, and particularly the year before, a team with a lot of aging veterans, some issues with coaching, some issues with scheme, a lot of issues with injury. And the 2016 Bears are fixing to be a lot more, I guess, young and hungry than teams in the past. Now, I guess the downside to this would be that there is some confusion over who's going to play what position and what would be the best fit for, all this supposed new young talent. But another wrinkle in the mix is that a lot of the remaining talent also has lingering injury woes. So maybe let's start at the offensive side of the ball and then switch over to the defense and I guess get as good of a sense as we can of what the Bears are going to look like in 2016.
Yeah, the Bears are a much different team than I think even from last year, but I think that we remember from a couple of years ago. So much so that I think it's beginning to change sort of the tenor of the division. With the Vikings sort of resurgent and the Lions, emphasizing their defense. I mean, we just had a great discussion about the Lions, last week that I think tells us about how the division is changing. And I think the Bears, their identity is changing enough that the division doesn't look anything like it did back in 2009, 2008. And so, one of the things that is different, there's a lot more youth, I think, in the division overall. I think the Packers are maybe the exception, but that's not, quite true because they've got, Quentin Rollins and Demarius Randall. And we talked about that with Justice a couple weeks ago. But the Bears have added a couple of young players to go along with their very, very old players. I mean, they've gotten rid of some familiar old faces like Matt Forte. They got rid of Peanut Tillman a season ago. I mean, obviously they got rid of Jared Allen a season ago. But now they've got sort of youth everywhere, and that creates a lot of like you were saying, a lot of issues. And I think sort of one of the issues that comes up is maybe the Bears' best offensive player, Kyle Long. He didn't have, from my opinion and from what I saw, which admittedly wasn't a ton, but he didn't have as great of a season at right tackle as he did at right guard. Which is not to say the way that he finished his season at right guard when he was a rookie was as spectacular as the way he started it. But he was very, very good right guard. They moved him to right tackle. That wasn't fantastic. And then the question is whether or not he's going to be a tackle or a guard right now. There's even some talk about him potentially being the left tackle. Because you have your best offensive lineman, you put him at tackle. A lot of people think of it like that. The left tackle position is the most important position, so you got to put your best lineman there. I'm not so sure I agree with that move. I think you play Kyle Long where he's best, which is at the right guard position. Obviously he was originally slated to be a tackle. I think at Oregon, it's one of the reasons he was a first round draft pick because of that versatility. But I think the way that he played guarding, he was so good at guard. That can really help because interior pressure is really important too. You're more likely to see pressure come from the edge, but I think interior pressure has a bigger impact on quarterbacks. And whatever the long term answer at quarterback is, whatever. But for now, if they can keep pressure off of Jake Cutler, I think they can be competitive. So that's a question that they're trying to figure out.
Charles Leno Jr. is according to an article on ESPN.com by staff writer Jeff Dickerson. Charles Leno Jr. is the favorite to stick around at left tackle in 2016, but there's a quote from GM Ryan Pace. The thing about Kyle Long, he means, is that we all love is his position flexibility. But I'm confident in Leno. I thought he got better as the season went on, and I do think Leno was a natural left tackle. That's his best spot. He's a natural. But Kyle has some position flexibility. I think with our offensive line, when I look at that, we've got some flexibility with some guys there. Our goal is to improve that position, but just acquire the best players and let it all sort out and start the best five. That seems like the attitude of somebody that would rather have Kyle Long start at right guard if there's somebody else that can start at either tackle spot, especially given his, I guess, sort of inability to stop some big plays from happening when he was in the tackle spot towards the end of last season.
Right. And I think that's the correct attitude to take. I mean, I don't think that Charles Leno was any good. I think the Bears are in strong disagreement with me from what I've heard. He's taken all the first team reps at left tackle, and I was listening to some Bears radio, I think from CBS, about the way that the Bears are viewing the left tackle position, and they really, really like Charles Leno. And they think that, the results that he had last season weren't good. He gave up a lot of pressures and a lot of sacks, but his technique and his recovery, were both things that stuck out to them. And so their attitude, it seems to be for Leno, is, the stuff that's easy to teach he may not have down yet, but the stuff that's hard to teach he has down. I don't think that that's necessarily a great approach. As a Vikings fan, I'm kind of happy that they're sticking with Charles Leno at left tackle. Because I think they're sort of over-focusing on good aspects and under-focusing on weak aspects. Like he just isn't quick enough to react, and he doesn't really know what opponents are going to do. And I don't think that's something that's going to change that much over time. And so that'll be an issue for them. So, when Everson Griffin plays against them, or Julius Peppers or Ezekiel Ansah, who most of us on the other side, but whoever. I think that it's going to be sort of a weak spot for them.
Now, Dickerson writes, Long is now eligible for a contract extension entering his fourth year in the NFL, which is an interesting subplot since tackles typically make more money than guards. If you were Kyle Long, would you be, I guess, agitating or gunning to try and take a spot at tackle, even though it may not be the position that you are, the most natural fit for, because it could potentially reap financial rewards for you throughout the rest of your career?
That's interesting. It's always tough to answer these because, for me, the answer is, usually, the difference is a couple $1 million, but I still make, a couple $1 million. I don't really care. But, for players, it's a whole different environment. They have to take care of like families. They have to think about like medical bills, all the way down the line. These are usually career earnings that they're making in the first couple years of their actual adult life, and not, yearly earnings. And so, it's a much more difficult conversation for them in terms of like their total average for per year. Good guards make $8 to $10 million a year, usually like probably around 9 in a new contract environment, like the one in next year's cap. And bad tackles, they make, $4 million, $5 million a year. Like think, a little bit more than what Andre Smith, signed with the Vikings for. So if that's the difference, then you kind of want them to be a guard, but he probably doesn't believe he'll be a bad tackle. And average tackles, they make, over $9 million a year. So, think Brandon Albert or Kelvin Beachum or Ryan Clady, they're all making, $8 to $9 million a year. If you think about it along those lines, then it makes sense to be a tackle. And if you have the confidence that most players usually have, then you'd want to gun for that tackle spot. But I think it'd be best for him and best for the Bears if he stays at guard, because he is such a phenomenal guard. He's not necessarily how La'el Collins was at guard. He's not necessarily how Joel Bitonio was as a rookie or anything like that. But he's got the potential to be a top 5 guard if he's not already there. So I think that he should probably stay at guard.
Like when Lisa Simpson found herself up against stiff academic competition for the first time and realized the value of being a big fish in a small pond. Maybe it's best for Kyle Long to remain at right guard.
Indeed. Kyle Long is Lisa Simpson.
That's
you heard it here first.
Not really what I was going for with that.
That's exactly what you were saying.
That's not what I was saying at all. So Manny Ramirez has retired, and Matt Slauson was released. So the Bears have been widely regarded as having one of the worst lines in football for a while now.
For years. For years.
Drew McGarry famously said that a stack of folding chairs would have about as good a chance of stopping a defense as the Bears line. So old talent out, old, I guess, not terribly talented, gone. You are, low on Charles Leno. You feel like Kyle Long is like the best player on the line, if I'm correct. Mm-hmm. And I guess, where do you see other areas of improvement? Where are the Bears going to be not the worst on the line this season?
So it sounds like they're pretty committed to Cody Whitehair at left guard. I mean, if not, then, Ted Larson is competing for that spot. Cody Whitehair, one of the issues for him is that he didn't necessarily test all that well, but, a lot of people considered him to be the top guard in the class. It's a second-round pick, getting maybe the top guard in the class. I think that's probably a good spot for them. I think that he may have some rough spots as a rookie, but I think that overall that's an upgrade over, losing Matt Slauson, even though Matt Slauson has been so good for so long. I think that in general, Cody Whitehair will probably, help them out. I think against, Linval Joseph and Sharif Floyd, I think he'll probably struggle, which is nice to think about. But, for the most part, I think that they've probably upgraded by jettisoning some of their talent and grabbing Cody Whitehair. But at center, and, there's a right tackle problem too. At center, they've got Hronis Rasu, who before his final college season, a lot of people consider him the top center. But, a deeper look into his film, and a lot of people kind of were down on him. And a lot of that has to do, with strength. If I'm remembering correctly, a lot of it had to do with strength, and a lot of it had to do with some of the uniqueness of the scheme at Oregon and stuff like that. And so, the question is whether or not he'll be able to, put together a season that will justify the 3rd round pick that they spent on him. And I don't know about that. I think he started about half the season last year. And in those games, he wasn't particularly good. And so I think that's going to be another spot of weakness for them. And I think at right tackle with Bobby Massey, I think that they're kind of screwed. And I can kind of see why you'd want to put Kyle Long out at right tackle if you didn't want to put him at left tackle. But there's not really an answer. Like if you put him at right tackle, then you don't really have another option at right guard except for maybe Ted Larson, who's bad. Or, you keep Kyle Long at right guard and keep Bobby Massey at right tackle, who's also bad. He had, one half of one good season once, and that's about it. The thing about Bobby Massey is that he knows what he needs to do. He's just not good at doing it. So, you can always kind of hope that because he's picked up on everything that he can put it all together on the field. But I'm not so sure that'll happen. So I think the Bears line overall has probably improved, but I think that it hasn't improved enough for it to be considered not a liability, which is, weird because, when talking about the Vikings line, we talk about some of the worst offensive lines in football. We talk about San Diego, Seattle, the Vikings, Indianapolis, and that's all true. Those are all 4 significantly worse lines, or they were last year. But, I think that this offensive line for the Bears, could be sneaky bad, if you will, and cause them a lot of problems.
Did you know Bobby Massey and Kyle Long played against each other in a high school football game?
I mean, that makes sense.
State championship game for 2 private schools. Apparently, Long lobbied hard for Massey to join the Bears, even though that meant Long had to move back to right guard from tackle. So maybe it's not about the money. Maybe it's more about having your homie on the line next to you.
Yeah, I mean, quality of life is defined by many things. One of them is money. The one is how happy you are in your work life, and that includes coworkers you can get along with. We all learn lessons.
All right. So let's take a look at the backfield, the guys that this line is ostensibly going to protect. So I can't remember a time, and I can tell that my high school and college football viewing days are over, because neither Brian Urlacher nor Matt Forte play for the Bears.
Yeah, right. It's a lot different, isn't it? The only thing that is familiar to me is Jake. He's not even originally a Bear; he's a Bronco.
Yeah, exactly, and that's like a new school sort of situation. But without Matt Forte, seriously, what are the Bears going to do?
And Julius Peppers?
Oh yeah,
is in Green Bay.
Okay, but I think of Julius Peppers as a Carolina Panther. That's kind of like Jay Cutler. He's not. He's a by way of Bear. But seriously, what are they going to do at running back? Right now, they've got Jeremy Langford, Jordan Howard, and Kadeem Carey. What's the plan? Just have the 3 of them take the divide the 1/3 of carries that will not be passes amongst themselves, or is Langford going to be is it going to be like Denver? Is Langford going to kind of be the CJ Anderson to the other 2 backs? What do you foresee?
Oh, it's going to be a big problem for them. I might be the last person on the planet that still thinks Jeremy Langford could be kind of good at performances. A lot of people kind of disagree. A lot of people also, watched a lot more of him. Would probably defer to sort of their judgment on that. I don't think I probably would have picked a little bit sooner if I were them, because I thought some of their picks, weren't necessarily all that great. I thought the Floyd pick was poor. I thought, the DeAndre Hall pick was whatever. The Deion Bush pick was whatever. The Kwiatkowski pick was whatever. And they probably could have picked a better running back with any of those picks. So, Jordan Howard is a fine running back, but I don't know if he'll be able to sort of replace some of the stuff that they've needed there. The thing is, both Langford and Howard, they can run it up the middle. I like to think of Langford as a pass catching back. That's probably not true. I'm just kind of remembering Matt Forte. And so they don't really have a guy that, can do sort of all of the things, except for Jaquiz Rogers, who they mostly signed, as a special teams guy. He might end up being sort of the pass catching back out of the backfield. But that's something that, that we'll probably have to watch out for, because you kind of want to figure out, what's going to happen. So between all of that, I think that they're going to really suffer, I think, in the running game, which, given sort of the strength of the passing game or how good their passing game can be, maybe that's not a huge issue. But I think that it does make them a little bit one-dimensional when they weren't before. And it also, because Matt Forte was a phenomenal pass-catching back, it also reduces sort of the diversity of options that they had in the passing game that I think went really underrated. It's not just having Alshon Jeffrey, it's having Alshon and Matt Forte and Martellus Bennett, who's also gone. So without a running game at all, I think it makes them a little bit more predictable, a little bit, easier to defend.
So here's a curiosity. Customarily, the Bears have rolled with 3 quarterbacks, but now they're down to just Jay Cutler and Brian Hoyer after cutting David Fales and Dalen Williams.
Oh, did they just cut those 2?
They did.
Because
so that they could keep Paul Lasike, a first-year fullback from New Zealand. Although he played for BYU, like he's not just like fresh. It's not like a Moritz Boringer situation.
Wow.
Yeah, isn't that weird? So
yeah, that's still a fullback.
They have one fullback under contract, and he may not even win the starting job. So the Bears could find themselves in a situation with 2 quarterbacks and no fullback, which I guess they could probably just sign another quarterback. But still, that's...
Well, I mean, it's not like Jay Cutler or Brian Hoyer have ever been injured.
Oh, no, they're known for their ability to play every game season in and season out, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, no, they should feel pretty safe with Cutler. Wait, are they serious? I did not know that. That is interesting news. Yeah. So I guess if you don't have much confidence in the running game, I guess double invest in fullbacks. That's not something I would have necessarily expected going in. But yeah, no, I guess that creates another vulnerability, if you will, for the Bears. I mean, we've been talking about their offense a little bit in terms of, some of their, other vulnerabilities. Their offensive line has like a bunch of weak spots. Their running back core is a little bit weak, but a different type of vulnerability, I think, is the fact that they don't have any quarterback resilience. So yeah, no, that's definitely going to be interesting. I don't know that getting a fullback that you're going to end up cutting anyway is worth cutting, Fales and Dalen Williams, but like, maybe that's because I'm biased for Fales. I always thought Fales was going to make it. If the fact that he isn't making it makes me kind of sad. At least he's not making it for the Bears, I guess. But yeah, no, it makes them a fairly fragile team, sort of in the Nassim Taleb sense, and also in their players are fragile sense.
In the physically and strategically sense,
right?
Physically, yeah. And yes, that. Looking a little bit closer to the line, the wide receiver core for Chicago, of course, looks much different than it did last season. Alshon Jeffrey participated in spring workouts for a couple of days and then, I guess, pieced out, allowing Marquess Wilson, who is still recovering from foot surgery and is expected to be put on the physically unable to perform list as soon as that sort of thing is allowed. Beyond that, there's Kevin White, Eddie Royal, Deontay Thompson, Josh Bellamy, Daniel Braverman, and then a handful of guys that didn't make the cut or that won't make the cut expectedly.
Oh, don't you diss Mark Mariani like that. Yeah, no, it's interesting because initially you look at this, this receiver core, you're like, Kevin White, Alshon Jeffrey, they could be really good. Eddie Royal is definitely a guy that tends to start for teams. That altogether, that's like a pretty decent, receiving core. But you think about, last year they had Martellus Bennett at tight end. They traded him to the Patriots. And so now they're stuck with bad Zach Miller as opposed to Seahawks Zach Miller. Wide receiver, we don't actually know if Kevin White's good. We just know he's a high draft pick. Obviously we know more than that because, a lot of people do offseason study. I wasn't the biggest fan of Kevin White coming out. I know that I'm in the minority here. He's obviously an athletic freak, which is something that, if you've listened to this podcast a lot, that I tend to gravitate towards. But I think that, as a prospect, Kevin White actually kind of reminds me a little bit of Trey Waynes. Different reasons. I think that, technically they were a little bit further behind than a lot of people wanted to admit to. And I thought that the schemes they were playing in kind of hid a lot of things that were really important. Kevin White, more complete athlete than Trey Waynes, so it's not, quite the same. But I thought that they were both be good players, but they weren't worth the 11th overall pick. Kevin White was picked 11th overall too, wasn't he? That really completes the analogy for me, doesn't it? I don't know if he was.
Stick the landing on that one. That was good.
Yeah, that's great. But yeah, I don't think that they're worth the pick that they got, and so I think that Kevin White may end up disappointing. Obviously, a year coming off of an injury already kind of disappointing, but it's not to say that he won't play well for them. I think the key for them is Alshon Jeffrey, who seems to be content with the fact that he has a franchise tag. There was like some worry that he was going to hold out after he was gone from voluntary workouts, but he showed up at mandatory minicamp and seemed like he signed a tender. So sounds like he'll play. And then after that, you have to figure out Marquess Wilson's perpetual foot injury. Daniel Braverman I like a lot, but he's a 7th-round pick. I like him a lot for a 7th-round pick. There's not a lot of those that end up, making a difference either way. If he's lucky, he'll end up having the same kind of impact as Charles Johnson. Obviously, completely different players, but, a couple hundred yards would be a really, really solid outcome for him. So, you have a slot receiver in Eddie Royal. You've got 2 really big receivers now, Alshon Jeffrey and Kevin White. But I think this receiving core has a strong possibility of being oversold. And I think that, Kevin White might benefit from some of the defensive coverage that Alshon Jeffrey will get. But I think that, for the most part, for a one-dimensional team, that one dimension isn't that impressive to me, even though Jay Cutler had a much, much better season last year than people are giving him credit for, and still is, a threat.
So Eddie Royal, back when he played with Denver, and to some extent when he was playing with San Diego, was like their 1.5 receiver. Like, he wasn't quite the number 1 receiver on any team, but he wasn't really like, he was as good or better than, anyone who you want to put him up against at number 2. In Chicago,
yeah, he's definitely a guy who starts for teams.
Okay, but in Chicago, and I would argue that even in San Diego in 2014, he was more of like the number 2.5 receiver. Like his game is starting to slip.
Yeah, well, I mean, he was never a phenom athlete in that 5'10", 180 some pounds, 185, I think.
No, he's built for the slot, like you were saying.
Yeah, there wasn't a lot of opportunities for him. And I think his receptions have gone, fairly I think his rookie year in Denver was probably his best year, right? Since then, he's just been, a guy who can complement offenses pretty well. He can't take over offenses, but he's still somebody that I'd worry about in Chicago. I know that he only had 250 some yards, I think, in half a season with them. But yeah, I think that he can be 500 to 600, maybe even depending on passing volume, a 700-yard guy for them. That's something that that's why you have both Captain Munderland and Mackenzie Alexander, because you need to have those kinds of nickel cornerbacks. Not I'm not necessarily confident that a rookie, even a rookie that I love like Alexander or that Captain Munderland, who played a lot better last year than the year before, will necessarily do a great job of shutting down Eddie Royal. But he's kind of like the way you think about when you say Matt Forte is an excellent receiver. Like, yeah, Matt Forte is one of the best receiving backs we've seen in recent history. But as a receiving threat, he's going to get you 500-600 yards. And so, he's going to be a complementary piece. I think Eddie Royal is kind of the same. He's going to continue to provide a consistent role for the Bears. But I think without, Alshon Jeffrey playing well, which he will, and Kevin White playing well, it's not going to be that big of a concern to me.
So do you think that the trio of Alshon Jeffrey, Marquez Wilson, and Eddie Royal, given their injury histories, will combine for a total of 36 full games played? Do you think 2 out of the 3 of them will play, a full season?
What's interesting is that you can kind of throw Kevin White in there because he missed the entire last season out of injury. So, Wilson. No, I don't think you'll get 36 games out of the 3 of them combined.
Wow. Well, that's probably got to be Debbie Downer for the old Chicago Bears then, huh?
Yeah, probably.
So
I can't imagine that being good news, right?
Does the question become, how good is Josh Bellamy really?
I think the question becomes, how quickly can we rely on Daniel Braverman? Which, the answer is probably don't rely on him.
Hopefully never is the answer to that question. But regrettably, It being Chicago, well, and of course, Soldier Field being what it is, the answer is regrettably, probably soon.
Yeah. And okay, so as we're wrapping up the offense, I do emphasize, I think that this is an offense that has a lot of potential to be really good. Cutler to Jeffrey is that's not a joke. I think the Vikings know that. I think Vikings fans know that. But I just think that there's a lot of problem areas that make this. If it were, an offense that a lot of people were hyping before the offseason, it's sort of like fool's gold. I think there's a lot of vulnerabilities in this offense. I'm emphasizing that a bit more than I need to. But it can be a very good offense. It can be, top 10 in scoring. And, its passing game can sort of excel, but, there's a lot of points of failure. I think center, I think right tackle, those are areas of serious concern. I think left tackles is an area of concern. I think that, receiver depth is an area of concern, even if you like Kevin White. And I think that, they don't really have an option to begin running the ball unless somebody steps up.
Well, there you go. So should we turn towards the defense then? Take a look at the other injury-prone Bears before we hit the old Vikings news well for a moment?
Yeah, no, for sure.
So if Mark Twain were going to write a short story about the Bears 2016 season, do you think it would be titled Pernell McPhee and his scoped out knee?
I think that would be a limerick that would appear in a Mark Twain novel. Yeah.
But seriously though, so Pernell McPhee, he's the big story of the offseason, right?
Yeah, he if he's fully healthy, which I don't know sort of what the update for that is, you might know. But if he's fully healthy, I think that he's a serious problem. I wrote a piece, it was mostly focused on Everson Griffin, but it was generally a way to evaluate pass rushers after separating out hurries, hits, and sacks, and separating out strength of opposition. And players like Pernell McPhee and Lamar Houston and Willie Young, and we'll talk about them in a second. Those players, they all benefited from being able to play against the offensive lines of the Minnesota Vikings and the Seattle Seahawks and the Arizona Cardinals and all that. But it is notable that Pernell McPhee, even after you sort of adjust for the strength of opposition, was very good at getting pressure on opposing quarterbacks. The question for him when he's healthy, so question one is will he maintain health? He had a lot of health issues last year. I think he played a lot of games. But he played in 14 games, but he was questionable for every single one of them. He had, injury concerns back in 2014 and 2013 as well. But those are all sort of ancillary concerns. Those are the kind of concerns that, they haven't really impacted his ability to get on the field that much, but they may have impacted, two things. The first is long-term ability to stay on the field. Because you stayed on the field a long time doesn't mean that you will not continue to. As a digression, I think people remember Percy Harvin, right? He was hugely injury prone for the Vikings. Everyone remembers that. But he only missed 2 games until the 2012 season. So 2009, 2010, 2011, people were calling him injury prone. At the beginning of 2012, they were calling him injury prone. And he'd only missed something like 2 to 4 games, I think, at all.
I think fantasy owners were calling him injury prone because they were sick of seeing the Q next to his name.
Exactly. No, that's exactly what I mean. That's what's happening to Pernell McPhee. The Q is always next to his name if you're in an IDP league. There's even a D next to his name a couple of times. He was constantly questionable, but he constantly played. We ended up seeing, Percy Harvin's health play out. He missed the second half of 2012. He missed significant portions of 2013. He missed all of 2013 except the Super Bowl. Except the one game against the Vikings. He missed a significant amount of time in 2014. We kind of saw how that played out. And so I think that's kind of a warning flag for McPhee. So that's the first issue, is whether or not he can get on the field. The second issue is one of the things that I ended up seeing with McPhee is that, he was really, really good at getting pressure on the quarterback, but he wasn't necessarily good at finishing. In that article, I described, there's some players who just aren't good at finishing. Paul Kruger, Brian Robinson, with the Vikings, they get a lot of pressure on the quarterback. They don't necessarily get a lot of sacks, but more often than not, pressures are a better predictor than sacks are in terms of predicting who's going to get sacks next year, who's going to get pressure next year. They just correlate better with future sacks, and so the fact that McPhee got a lot of sacks last year, that's something that got a lot of pressure last year, not a ton of sacks. That's something you want to watch out for because that can turn into a lot of sacks pretty easily. But if that knee is a problem, that might be a reason why he's not finishing, and that health may be more determinant of his ability to actually take the quarterback down. Either way, that combination of pass rushers, and I'm not even getting into Leonard Floyd yet. The combination of pass rushers, Lamar Houston, Willie Young, Pernell McPhee, they're all extremely good pressure producers for the Chicago Bears. And when I was breaking down that piece, none of them had ended up having. I think my limit was something like 250 or 300 pass rushing snaps, and none of them ended up having those 300 pass rushing snaps. But individually, if you put them back in, if you compare them against the rest of them, they had a top 10 pass rusher. They had, I think that was Pernell McPhee. They had a top 20 pass rusher. I think that was Lamar Houston. And they had another, top 30 pass rusher in Willie Young. And that's something you really have to watch out for. And I think that pass rushing unit, especially, as they get more and more comfortable with Vic Fangio's scheme, that's something, you want to watch out for.
Interesting. So I'm looking at an article from the National Institutes of Health that we will link to in the show notes. That is a study of whether or not NFL players can return to play after chondroplasty of the knee, specifically in NFL players. And there are other types of arthroscopic knee surgery, and I don't know exactly if this is the one that Pernell McPhee had, but the conclusion they reached in the abstract is that a majority, 67%, of NFL players are able to return to play after arthroscopic knee surgery, including chondroplasty of articular cartilage lesions. Athletes who play more games per season are more likely to return to play after that surgery, but those undergoing concomitant microfracture are less likely to return. So if your arthroscopy results in microfractures of the knee as they're cleaning it out, then less likely to return to play. No statistical significance was determined when comparing the athletes who returned to play with respect to age at surgery, lesion location, lesion size, lesion grade, position the athlete played, or draft round. So it seems like across, I don't know how large their sample was. You can, I imagine, review this article more thoroughly and figure it out for yourself. But the impression it lends is that players who play a lot are likely to return or have a 2 out of 3 chance of returning to play without much difficulty, unless there were complications with the surgery. And there isn't really a whole lot of difference whether you're a linesman or a quarterback or a defensive back, whatever.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting. Obviously, that would give us a little bit more information if we knew sort of if there were complications in the surgery. I don't think we know. You might know, but I think generally speaking, we probably hear ancillary evidence or tertiary evidence if there were, that he's taking longer to recover and stuff like that. So for the most part, it sounds like there's a really good chance he'll go back to play and get back to his previous level of play. Did that article or did that piece of research rather, did that go into re-injury rates at all?
Did not.
Because that will be significant too. So yeah. They give functionally they would be giving McPhee a really, really good chance at returning and playing, probably at the level that he was playing at before. But the question is whether or not he's going to be potentially re-injured. So that'll be something to watch out for.
I imagine trying to construct a study like that would be just like one colossal HIPAA violation.
It would be if the NFL players didn't kind of waive their rights, basically.
That's true. And this study, it looks like, was conducted specifically within one institution, which I imagine the NFL probably has a handful of specialist sites where they like their players to go or where players like to go.
Right. That makes sense.
At any rate, the prognosis is not terrible for Pernell McPhee. Right.
Which is not great for the Vikings.
The prognosis is also not terrible for the rest of the Bears' pass rush. In the offseason, Leonard Floyd and Danny Trevathan were added to a pass rush that was already capable when healthy, which was not frequently last season.
Right. That's interesting because Floyd and Trevathan can be used all over the line. They could be used as just off-ball linebackers. Like Trevathan was used in Denver, like Floyd was very often used at Georgia, and they can be pretty good off-ball linebackers, by themselves. But they offer, I think, pass rushing upside. I think that the Bears are a little bit too optimistic about, the every down pass rush capability of Leonard Floyd, but I think for the most part, his ability to play off the ball and then rush the passer, along with Danny Trevathan and a little bit Jarrell Freeman, gives them sort of a multiple attack that Vic Fangio is very comfortable using and has used a lot. Throw in the addition of another rookie, Jonathan Bullard, who I thought was maybe the best pick that they made in that draft, very good draft pick. They could get some interior pressure. So that's all something that's going to cause a little bit of havoc. I think that the Bears defense after 2013 it took some really huge hits and it hadn't been good. And I think that the bones are here for them to be a good defense again. I think that pass rush, with Akeem Hicks, Eddie Goldman, Mitch Unrein, I'm not super impressed with Goldman or Unrein. But with Akeem Hicks, with Jonathan Bullard, maybe Will Sutton, lives up to his promise, and then McPhee and Young and Floyd and Houston and a little bit Trevathan and Freeman. I think with all of them, you've got a really solid pass rush, and players that are actually pretty good against the run as well. So that's something to watch out for.
Do you think this line combines for more or fewer than 36 sacks in 2016?
Yeah, I think more. I don't think they'll have a 50 sack season or anything like that, but more than 36 seems really doable to me. Like, why'd you pick 36?
Because that was the number that I used in the offense for a number of games started between 3 likely to be injured players.
Oh, okay, fair enough. Yeah, no, I think I wouldn't be surprised to see a 42 sack season or whatever.
Well, because 36 would be like a little above average, right? And 50 would be like outstanding.
Yeah, exactly. I think the average over the past 3 years is like 36, 37. And then the top over the past 3 years, I think, is 52. And I think that was the Broncos last year. So, 50 would be pretty outstanding. But I think a little bit over 40 would be sort of where I'd expect them to be.
Wow. Sounds like Akeem Hicks has the starting cornerback position, and it's up to someone to take the other spot.
Starting defensive end.
Or, excuse me, defensive end.
Yeah, and we don't really know. That could be Mitch Unrein. I said, I named him, but it could end up being Jonathan Bullard, or it could be Will Sutton. I think Bullard's going to end up winning the job just because I think personally that he's, extremely good. Unrein's better suited at nose tackle anyway, but they've got Eddie Goldman there. So it'll probably be between Will Sutton and Jonathan Bullard. And, I haven't heard much about who's winning that spot at OTAs. Again, not a Chicago guy. I've only been, reading up and listening on Chicago stuff. And, it doesn't sound like, there's a lot of people talking about who has the inside track for that other defensive end job. But, I'd be pretty scared if it ends up being Bullard.
Indeed. So you don't think it'll be Ego Ferguson?
No.
You and nearly everyone else, it sounds like. Any final thoughts on the defense before we talk about something a little more Viking centric?
Yeah, no, I think one thing to keep in mind with Chicago is that they've got a very, very young secondary. Tracy Porter aside. So they've added a couple of rookies. I think they've added 4: DeAndre Hall, Deion Bush, DeAndre Houston Carson, all in the draft, and they also added undrafted Taviz Calhoun, who before the season started, some people were thinking could be a 2nd or 3rd round pick. Obviously that didn't end up happening, and it's not that he struggled; it's more that people kind of figured out who he was. But then beyond that, they have 5th round pick Adrian Amos, who I wanted the Vikings to pick in 2015. And 1st round pick Kyle Fuller. They're going to have to figure out sort of what's happening with Tracy Porter. They're going to have to figure out what's happening, at nickel, and they're going to have to figure out what's happening at the other safety spot. It could be Deion Bush. It could be, Chris Brzezinski. It could be Omar Bolden. But, it's a secondary that doesn't have any proven talent yet. I mean, Porter played a lot better than I thought he would, but, at the same time, you can only play so well. And so beyond that, they could end up being a very good secondary, especially with the pressure that defense is giving them, that defensive line is giving them, or they could end up being a very poor secondary, prone to a lot of mistakes. They've got players that, have flashed. Adrian Amos has flashed a lot. He flashed a lot last season. Kyle Fuller, the beginning of his rookie season played well. After that, he didn't, he wasn't so hot. Omar Bolden, you're familiar, he did, some pretty good stuff at safety for Denver, but he's not a proven talent or anything like that. So, there's a couple of things that are worth looking into. Sheriff McManus could win the nickelback position, or it could be Bryce Callahan, who knows. A lot of potential, a lot of, I think, volatility there. And so, like I said, the bones of a good defense are there. If that secondary lives up to, 3/4 of its potential or whatever arbitrary number you want to use, that could be a pretty dangerous defense.
So the Vikings play the Bears in week 7, where if Marquez Wilson is on the physically unable to perform list during training camp, that will be his first week back.
Oh, well, that's not that concerning. He's the third or fourth receiver, right?
So do you think that the Chicago team will already be in injury shambles by the time we go to Soldier Field to play them? Or will that be more of a they'll fall apart after we play them sort of situation?
Yeah, I don't know. I think when you look at their offense, I obviously mentioned a couple of times the vulnerability of the offense. I think one or two of those injuries will have come to bear by now. By then, right? By game 7 or whatever, week 7.
Week 7.
Yeah. So one or two of those injuries will have occurred, and I think it'll end up having a pretty big impact on the offense. But it's not like everybody's going to be injured at once.
It is also a Monday night game in Chicago. So basically a game that the Vikings are historically destined to lose.
Yeah. They won in Chicago, last year or the year before, right? So
last year, but I'd like to think that last year was the start of a new trend. Although I will say I think the Monday night curse is a little stronger than the Soldier Field curse.
Yeah. No, it's a little strong.
This game represents a big opportunity for the Vikings, and I think you kind of showed where it could be, winnable. I think you're right. I think the extreme youth of their wide receiver core leaves them exploitable downfield, even if their offensive line and their wily, unbreakable quarterback can keep his wits about him long enough to do his veteran thing and all that. But I have high hopes for that game. I think the Vikings are more than a match for this year's Bears, even with the upgrades they've made to their team. So, and who knows what kind of team that'll look like in week 7, which is the great thing about the Bears. You never know.
Right.
So a little bit of, I guess, kind of notebook stuff, semi-Vikings related. Teddy Bridgewater is going to be on the Celebrity Family Feud later this week as the father of the NFL offense family.
Do you know who else is? I haven't clicked on the article. Do you know who else is on that team?
Yeah. Okay. So it's NFL offense versus NFL defense, and both teams are playing for charity.
Right.
The offense side is Teddy, Cardinals running back David Johnson, Pierre Garçon from the Redskins, and Joe Staley from the 49ers.
Oh, weird. Okay. Wait, isn't there usually a fifth? Shouldn't there be 5? Teddy, David, Pierre.
Oh, yeah, and Marvin Jones.
Oh, okay, cool.
Is the 5th.
I have no idea how smart those people are. Not that intelligence is all that key to Family Feud. But yeah, I guess go offense?
The defense is fathered by Denver Broncos linebacker Von Miller.
That seems appropriate.
Chargers linebacker Melvin Ingram, Raiders linebacker Malcolm Smith, Chiefs linebacker Tamba Hali, and Bengals linebacker AJ Hawk.
All linebackers, huh?
Yeah.
Huh.
The
all right.
Offense will be playing for the Professional Athletes Foundation, and the AFC defensive team will be playing for the Still Strong Foundation.
Isn't the Professional Athlete Foundation like one that takes care of professional athletes after so they're playing for themselves?
Well, I mean, not themselves. They're playing for themselves in the same way that your Social Security taxes.
I knew you were going to bring up Social Security. Yeah, fair.
So if you believe that they are contributing to an ongoing system that protects them all, then yes.
Okay. Those bastards.
Yeah. 26th of June is the date of the episode. Sunday.
Yeah, I might end up watching that.
7 p.m. Central Time.
Family Feud, so I'm not like...
I would never watch Family Feud, but I would watch Teddy Bridgewater on Family Feud.
Yeah, no, exactly. And it's not like I hate Family Feud. It's just like I don't want to bother with it. I used to watch the Game Show Network a lot when I had mono or whatever, uh, and I didn't have to go to school slash couldn't have the energy to go out of school.
But you
So
couldn't really do anything. Like you were pretty
yeah,
much like relegated to marking time, and Game Show Network is good for that, if nothing else.
yeah, exactly. And so I ended up watching a lot of Family Feud, and it's like somewhat easy to get invested in like outcomes and like your own guesses and stuff like that, and call people stupid. But it's definitely not a show that had like a lasting like yeah, I want to watch this again impression on me, like Jeopardy or some of the other weird crap they had on the Game Show Network.
Yeah, it's not as interesting as some of the just like genuinely weird game shows that have been relegated to the dustbin of cable television.
Right.
I mean, really, and Jeopardy, and I guess to a lesser extent Wheel of Fortune, they're still the gold standards. That's why they are on, prime time, 5 nights a week, heavily syndicated. It remains a bucket list item for old Dusty to try out for Jeopardy. Even if I don't make it, I still at least want to say that I tried.
Right.
They were here last year and I missed them. I have failed.
Yes. You're going to be kicked off the show now.
No!
Curfews.
That's okay. I tell you what, though. I wish I had 70,000 packets of fruit snacks.
That would be great. That is so cool, man. I mean, like, a pain in the ass, but also so cool.
Well, yeah, it turns out all you have to do is, well, one, be drafted by the Vikings, and then two, park your brand new SUV in Teddy Bridgewater's spot twice. And then
have a birthday.
Yeah. Well, and then it helps if your name is, to complete the quadfecta, it helps if your name is Laquan Treadwell, because he did all of those things. And for his birthday, Teddy and who was it? Was it Chad Greenway?
Sure.
No, Kyle Rudolph. It was Teddy and Kyle Rudolph that took 60,000 packets of Welch's fruit snacks and literally filled the inside of the vehicle with them. Like
that's out of control. I mean, they found a way to get like the sunroof open, so it was easy to just dump them in.
Yep, they just filled it up from the top. It was amazing.
That's just, yeah. I guess they didn't necessarily buy all the fruit snacks. Like Welch's may have donated it to the Vikings. I don't really know. The video was somewhat unclear.
It was not clear where the boxes of fun-size packs of Welch's fruit snacks came from.
Right, because they were like, thanks Welch's for this. And, you don't really say thanks if you purchase the product, right? I don't know.
I know that seems unnecessary. That does seem like sort of a promotional agreement sort of situation. But
and they were purple packets, right? So
another blue.
There's that. Oh,
they are blue packets. You can see the video on Vikings.com. It'll be linked in the show notes. But they are the fun size packs of Welch's fruit snacks, which I think everyone
a delicious snack
can agree are some of the best fruit snacks. They're not quite shark bites, but they are a delicious snack.
Do Welch's have like the both the clear and the cloud? I don't know what to call the other ones. The cloudy,
the like opaque gummies that the thick purple ones you can't see through, but like you can kind of see through the like white grape or pineapple ones, whatever flavor those are.
Right.
Yeah, they're extra fruity.
Okay.
I enjoy them very much.
I love those.
Oh,
they're fantastic.
Well, park in Teddy's spot during training camp, and maybe Welch's will bless you with a vehicle full of fruit snacks.
Yeah, I'll get on that right before I get towed.
Yeah, or they could just tow your car. One of the two. But actually, it would be worse if they filled your car with fruit snacks and then towed it. Because when your vehicle is towed, you are not allowed to recover anything from it until you pay the release fee. So then...
Yeah, it's all a scam.
You just have to look at your car full of fruit snacks and be like, well, now I can't have either one.
But think about it, though. Like, what's the release fee? Like $200?
I don't know. I've never been towed in Minnesota.
I mean, it's still profitable to get those fruit snacks out.
At for 60,000 packs, that would as long as your unit cost per pack was less than like 6 cents, yeah, you'd be good.
Yeah. So yeah, there's that.
Not that we're endorsing this as a strategy.
This is a terrible strategy. We cannot guarantee the fruit snackitude of your car. Only the tow.
Yeah, we can only guarantee that something will happen to it, whether it's the Delicious fruit snackitude, thanks to Kyle Rudolph, or terrible toitude, thanks to your friendly towing company that operates that lot. You'll just have to roll the dice. Do you feel lucky today, Vikings fans? Something I thought that was of note, simply because there was a hilarious font design fail on the Vikings website surrounding Moritz Böhringer's name.
Oh, yeah, I saw that. That's hilarious.
Whoops. Yeah, turns out not all fonts have all special ASCII characters added to them in that font. Little odd design note. Anyway, there was also a fan post on Daily Norseman, dailynorseman.com, the blog kind enough to host this podcast, by Dandy Fop, which is a great name, with the title, Moritz Böhringer Ain't Making the Roster.
Yeah, I read the piece. I get it. And I agree with the conclusion. I don't really, I'm not super into the reasoning. And Danny Fop himself says he's like, I'm not super into, reading body language or doing psychology or armchair psychology, I think is what he said on players. But, his argument is like, if you just take a look at the presser, Morris just sounds overwhelmed. And like, that might be true, but like, honestly, I mean, he sounds like he's speaking a foreign language. So that isn't as big a concern to me, but I do think that he's not making the roster. I thought that basically as soon as he was drafted, and I still approved of the draft pick, as did Dandy Fop. But I think from what I've heard, actually, he seems well. I was asked this question I think early on our radio show, and I hadn't heard what I've now heard, which is that he seems well out of his depth. He's extending for passes, where the passes aren't. He's doing all the, Patterson stuff that everyone was really angry about, like running routes to the wrong depth and, not understanding the playbook and stuff like that. So basically you expected all of this to happen. And he doesn't have, insane, learning curve or whatever. So you put him up against any of those six receivers, Patterson, all-world kick returner, Adam Thielen, amazing special teamer, Charles Johnson, a guy who is taking starting reps, I guess, but also, is potentially poised for, a comeback season, Jarius Wright, pretty decent, pretty good slot receiver. And then, of course, just Stephon Diggs, Laquan Treadwell. You can't really see a spot where he's better than any of those six guys, or in the case of Adam Thielen and Cordero Patterson, could take a role away from them, / could justify that role being given to someone else. There's a possibility the Vikings only carry 5 receivers. There's certainly very, very little possibility that they carry 7. And so, I don't think there's really room for Moritz to make the roster, because there's 6 receivers that are definitely above him. Maybe a couple of receivers that went undrafted that are also above him. Who knows? So, yeah, but we kind of expected this. It's difficult to emphasize the 2 following things. 1, how crazy athletic Moritz is. 2, how crazy the learning curve in the NFL is. A lot of people like to gloss over that, and it's not nothing.
Indeed. So perhaps the practice squad, if we're lucky.
Yeah, and the question there is, will he make it through waivers or whatever? And I think people are too hung up on the idea that he could get picked up off of waivers. Not a bunch of players are picked up off of waivers, and a lot of players that are picked up off of waivers wouldn't have made the original practice squad anyway, because they were cut for system fit reasons and stuff like that. So, a 6th-round pick, most of the time when they're cut, they make it through waivers just fine. They don't even make practice squads. So, I'm a little bit more worried with Moritz than a lot of other players because of that, sort of crazy athleticism. But in order to make it through waivers, he has to displace someone else's 53-person roster. And I do not see any team thinking, we'll waste a roster spot on this guy that, couldn't even make it through training camp.
No pity spots on any roster, that sort of thing?
Yeah, I see him making the practice squad, though. So, maybe he could end up being a special teams contributor in 2017, maybe even a receiver in 2018. But, for now, whatever.
You heard it here first. For now, whatever. So there's an article at Star Tribune about the recent, I guess, teeny tiny garbage tornado dust-up about Roddy White to the Vikings. which
Yeah, I don't even know if he said that. So he said he'd love to be a Viking. I don't know if he said it apropos of nothing or if someone asked him about the Vikings specifically.
someone asked him. Michael Rand writes in the Star Tribune article, a reporter who either picked up on the connections between George Stewart and Roddy White. George Stewart, of course, the Vikings wide receivers coach, was Roddy White's first wide receivers coach with the Falcons way back in the mid-2000s, back when Jay Cutler was a Bronco. What a
Back in the way back.
So that's like 2 whole high school classes ago. Rude. Anyway, so a reporter apparently either connected the dots himself or read an article on a blog and asked Roddy White if he'd like to team up with, in quotes, Stewart again. Keep in mind, Rand writes, that White and Stewart last worked together a decade ago, which is like a million years in NFL time.
Right. That's really funny.
And White caught 59 passes combined in his first 2 years with the Falcons. Not saying this was wrong to ask, just a guy doing his job.
Rain reported the piece really well. He broke it down. He was just like, look, a guy asked a question, which is his job. Roddy White, what else is he supposed to say? He'd say, yeah, I love the coach, and, sure, if that happens, I'd love to be a Viking. But then the headline becomes, I'd love to be a Viking, and that's how rumors start.
Yep, exactly. And, Roddy White does have 4 Pro Bowls, but he's also like...
He was so bad last year.
Yeah, and he's like almost my age, isn't he? He's like 33, 34.
Yeah. Well, that Waffle House did not treat him well.
Waffle House treats no one well.
Right. Well, do you know he has Waffle House before every home game? Or he did in Atlanta.
Really?
Yeah. Can you imagine that? Can you imagine, like, the stuff you get at Waffle House, like, right before you engage in, like, a high-end physical activity?
I'd have to change my waffle game a little bit. I'd probably just be doing, like straight up waffle sandwich with, like, bacon and sausage in the middle and, like, a lot of butter and a little bit of syrup. Instead of just, like...
That wouldn't weigh you down at all?
It would at least give me the fuel to power through, one way or another. Like my normal,
for me, I would just be focused on like not screwing up by having too much grease, and I would just have like waffles as carb boosters, and I'd skip the syrup, and I'd hate myself.
Oh no, see, I'd be going like full carbon protein boost, like going for that lasting like 5 hours of energy, like all the grease, less of the sugar. Because my normal strategy when I go to Waffle House is like, how many waffles can I eat? And how much like butter and syrup will it take to turn them into like a near liquid form so that it's less like eating and more like slurping? Like that strategy is not a winner if you're about to go play a professional football game. That I can guarantee you. I don't know if my other strategy would be a winner, but either way, Waffle House maybe not the best choice.
Well, that's where we are with Roddy White. No longer a high-end physical specimen. I wouldn't necessarily think that a Roddy White signing is in the offing, nor would I, think that would be a good move by the Vikings. I mean, he's old, maybe he's a veteran presence, but like I don't think that he can add yards to the team.
It would be a good deal for Roddy White. I feel like he needs the Vikings more than the Vikings need him.
Yeah, I think so.
At this point,
kind of like how Greg Jennings keeps texting Spielman without getting a text back.
Please, baby, just one more time.
It'll be different now, I promise.
I miss you, baby. I always loved you. I didn't know how much I loved you till I left. Yeah, all right. Heard that one before, Greg. All right. All right. You go back to your little home in Florida there, and you think about your life and your choices and where they brought you.
Doesn't he live in Minnesota?
I could have.
He might live in Minnesota.
Well, in that case, that kind of hurts.
He has to see his ex every day, man. That's brutal.
Exactly. He's in her every day.
In her, but not a part of her life.
I know, it's so just... it's got to be demoralizing. But, hey, man, if he had produced more when he was here, we wouldn't have traded him for Mike friggin' Wallace. Part of that's on him.
If he had been a better provider, that's true.
Exactly. If he could have taken care of his real family, we wouldn't have sent him to go and live with a weekend family. Now nobody's happy. That's not true.
There's another story, I think, right,
yeah,
that we can cover.
Exactly. A welcome digression. The great Adam Carlson writes a story on the Viking Age. Actually, it's a more of a coverage of another story. The Score has ranked the Minnesota Vikings defense number 2, just behind the, I guess, newly refreshed Denver Broncos defense.
I like that. So the piece that he linked to, the Matt Williamson piece at The Score, starts with the Danny Trevathan and Malik Jackson losses, and then finishes with the suspension to Aqib Talib. And so there's like not a bunch of like positives. It's just like, yeah, a bunch of bad stuff happened. Anyway, they're number 1.
I know, like it's funny because like they're still number 1 after that. Like I know they were like pretty dominantly number 1 when all 3 pieces were there last season, but now it's a little different story.
It'll be interesting. It'll be interesting, I think, from like an outsider's perspective, at least for me, to see what happens. I mean, Von Miller and Chris Harris and like some pretty interesting safeties, and I think Brandon Marshall, the linebacker, got extended to a new deal, if I remember correctly, and DeMarcus Ware is still old and there, and they've got Shaquille Barrett and Shane Ray, I think is the other one. They've got some pass rushing talent. They've got potentially some interior stuff. They've got a linebacker they like. They've got a couple of young safeties. It'll be interesting to see what happens, but I would not keep them at number 1.
If they can come together into a similarly or even like 75% as dominant defense as they were last year with the new players, that will be a huge victory for the coach in the system.
Yeah, no, for sure. So looking through these defensive power rankings, I don't know, man. Denver number 1, obviously they're going to be a top 5 team no matter what. I don't know if I put them number 1. Minnesota Vikings number 2. I love the Vikings, obviously, and I think they've got a great defense, but I don't know that I would put them at number 2 yet, especially, with Seattle at number 5. The guy's argument is that depth is an issue, but like that's an issue for all of the teams that he lists. Like the Arizona Cardinals, they've got some depth issues. He did the very first sentence in the piece about the Arizona Cardinals is about getting Tyrann Mathieu back, and that's a big part of getting them to that number 3 spot. So I probably put Seattle number 1. That Panthers at number 6, I kind of understand because Josh Norman is gone, but I put them up higher anyway. The Cardinals I might put a little bit higher too. The Texans I wouldn't necessarily put up high, but the guy is banking on a Jadeveon Clowney breakout season a little bit, so I can kind of understand where he's coming from. But I think that this year it might be the first year in a while where we haven't seen a dominant defense. I mean, that's what it feels like to me anyway. What about you?
Well, my posit is that the Vikings might just be that defense. And to go back to the kind of what was I saying? The strengths of system and the power of good coaching that I was talking about before. Minnesota, and this is from the Score article, Minnesota was last in the league in points allowed in 2013, the year before Zimmer was hired. The first year he was there, they improved to 11th. And the year after that, they improved to 5th. And the year after that is this season. And a bunch of the key players from those 2 previous seasons are already looking better in the offseason. And, everybody's finally starting to get used to it. It seems like everybody's finally starting to get used to the system. Yeah,
and they're all in like the best shapes of their lives.
Yeah, people who have struggled in the past, who would otherwise have been like extreme top tier players.
I understand.
I know what you're saying too. I know that
room to grow as a player. He's great. Everson Griffin, I think, is primed for another big season after a somewhat disappointing season last year. I think you've got Danielle Hunter, who might play more snaps in place of Brian Robinson, and that produces a lot of pressure. I think Sharif Floyd, if he's healthy, is phenomenal. And Val Joseph, if he's healthy, is like sort of a key to that defense. Anthony Barr is finally becoming a complete linebacker. Eric Kendricks isn't a rookie anymore. There's a lot of things like about this defense. I would even mention the corners. Trey Waynes, Terrence Newman, Xavier Rhodes, potentially Captain Munderland, Mackenzie Alexander. There's a lot to like about the defense. Well, I'm just saying, man.
I know the PR that comes out of training camp is always positive.
Defenses.
But, well, all right. Well, everybody thought that Denver's defense would be really good before the beginning of last season, but nobody knew that they would be historic. and nobody knew that they would be able to carry the corpse of Peyton Manning to a Super Bowl.
I don't know about that second thing, but I get your point about the first.
Maybe not nobody knew. I mean, sure, they might have been the odds-on favorite to win the Super Bowl, but I don't think anybody could have predicted the degree of offensive collapse that they had and still, being able to escape totally dominating.
If anybody had taken as a given that offensive performance, I think that you're right, that nobody would have been like, yeah, but still the Super Bowl.
Well, but dude, look at the betting lines on the Super Bowl,
Right.
So I feel like the Vikings might be that team this year if there is a team like that. And I suspect you are correct that we'll see more of the appearance of parity in NFL defenses this year than maybe in years past.
It will be super interesting, right? Because it was Denver, and then the previous 2 years it was Seattle. Previous 3 years maybe it was Seattle. I'm having a hazy memory. And then you have to figure out who is good. In 2012, actually, the dominant defense may not have existed because I think the Bears might have actually had the best defense in 2012 by a pretty significant margin, and no one talked about them. So maybe 2012 was the last time we didn't have a dominant defense, but I'd just argue that we didn't notice them, which then begs the question, like, what is a dominant defense if no one notices them?
Maybe that will be the Vikings' fate, a dominant defense that nobody notices.
No, I doubt it. A lot of people have been talking about the Vikings defense. I think that the Vikings defense plays at a number 2 or number 1 level. People will talk about it a lot. So, which I'm okay with. A lot of people are just like, yeah, I'd love to be under the radar or whatever. Fans, honestly, they just like their team where it is. Like they're either under the radar and that's good, or everyone recognizes they're great and everyone else is jealous, and that's good too.
A rare case of the grass being greener on this side of the fence. Like I for one would appreciate a little bit of recognition for all the hard work that's gone into building this awesome team that we're going to get to watch in this sweet new stadium. And,
yeah, let's give Harrison Smith, his All-Pro bonuses. Let's give Everson Griffin his Pro Bowl bonuses. Let's get Anthony Barr, an All-Pro recognition. I mean, let's get the defense. It'll be fun to have a defense that's like recognizably good. And I think it was against the Broncos. I think it was last year. Peyton Manning said it was either last year or the year before. Peyton Manning said something along the lines of, people talk about the zone blitz and the Pittsburgh defense built there. They talk about the Legion of Boom, and they talk about the cover 3 with Pete Carroll. And this is the Mike Zimmer defense. No better way to do that than, having that dominant defense, right? The Mike Zimmer defense. It's like the defense. It's great.
It is great. Hopefully it takes its place in the legacy of the NFL, which is one thing the league does so well.
Yeah.
I guess last note that I had for literally anyone who knows or cares, you may now gamble, or not gamble. You may now play. No, you may now play Canadian football contests on DraftKings.
Yes, great. So, I'll be there when Jonathan Crompton returns from his 6-game, not suspension, injury thing. I'll be all in on the Montreal Alouettes.
I was going to say, get your money on the Alouettes. Or your not money.
On individual Alouettes players.
Well, yeah, exactly. Get as many Alouettes on your team as you can. Especially once they're, what's his name? Jonathan Colton? No, he's the musician. What's their star player's name?
Not necessarily a star, but Jonathan Crompton. He's returning from a 6-game injury. And before that, it'll be a competition between a quarterback named Philip Sims, who is not Phil Sims. I'm just going off of memory. Vernon Adams, and another. Oh, and like a 15-year vet who used to be like Iowa or something's quarterback. I kind of hope it's Vernon Adams for obvious reasons, but yeah, they just cut Brett Smith, by the way, that quarterback that everyone was super into a couple years ago that went undrafted.
That's so sad. I don't know who that is.
Is the Wyoming guy that Benjamin Albright was super into?
Oh,
he was like, he's as good as Johnny Manziel. Yeah.
Okay.
Anyway, he just got cut.
So he is just as good as Johnny Manziel.
Boyd got cut too, but not from that team.
You stepped on my joke.
Oh, I'm sorry. What was your joke? I didn't hear it.
So he is just as good as Johnny Manziel.
Oh, that was a great joke. Actually, that's actually kind of funny.
Yeah, well, now I have to cut it all out. You fool.
No, I liked it. Keep the awkwardness as it is.
All right. I actually usually
it's great,
do.
man.
I enjoy having the curtain pulled back on what stupid fools we are. Well, mostly me. You're fine. I struggle.
No, I've got bad chemistry. I walk all over you.
Well, I keep telling people, like, people don't understand how difficult it is to do a conversation style show with someone you can't see.
It's super difficult. Like, there are always these almost moments where we feel like we can like talk, but we can't. We're waiting for the other one.
Exactly. There's a lot of like feinting and dodging around each other. It's a thing. But I tell you what, we do a pretty decent job. Let's get to the mailbag. So. Enough back patting. Josh Bjork at Iowa_Josh on Twitter writes us, Q: Q, we don't have time for your games. No one has talked about Kendricks being a solid linebacker as a rookie. The tape says he was good, ?
The tape says he was all right. Kendricks kind of lost in the shuffle with Anthony Barr and Danielle Hunter having a phenomenal season, and the mystery of whether or not Trey Waynes will turn out to be good. There's a lot of players to talk about, and Kendricks wasn't as clearly stand out as Harrison Smith or Anthony Barr. So you get lost in the shuffle.
# sample size.
That too.
Cheezel at Phoenix Pyros writes us, who will benefit the most if the offense does not have to line up extra tight ends to help block?
I would imagine Teddy, just because A, that implies that he'll have better protection, but B, also just means that he'll have more receiving options to go to.
You don't think it'll be Kyle Rudolph? You don't think he'll be the beneficent of that situation the most?
He could be, if he was good.
Oh,
no, I was going to mention, Kyle Rudolph and, potentially David Morgan, really good at catching the ball, just really bad at being athletic enough to get open. He's obviously more of a blocking tight end, but who knows? Red Ellison, if he's healthy, is underrated as a pass catcher. Michael Pruitt could make some waves because he's pretty athletic. But I think for the most part, it's not so much that the tight end will benefit. Although they will get more receiving yards as far as being an option, but it opens up the field a little bit more, and I think that'll even help Adrian and Jarek get yards as runners too. I just think in general, I would like the Vikings to run more often out of 11 personnel and out of spread sets and run against nickel formations. In order to do that, sometimes you have to have people who are good at running out of shotgun, which the Vikings have, but is not their primary ball carrier. So that's all part of it, but like part of it is, you bring a tight end to block, you bring another blocker into the box. And, this is what I was talking about, a couple of years ago about, running a nickel and running versus, a 9-man box versus an 8-man box, and Adrian Peterson, getting that 2,000-yard season is that, if you create a situation where more blockers have to do their job in order for you to get the same amount of yards, you create more points of failure and you create a lot more problems. That's not necessarily true. With zone running, you have the ability to sort of choose your lane, and having more choices, counterbalances that. But, it's something to think about. And I think that, the ability to run against multiple sets would be pretty good. So that's an underrated feature of not necessarily having to have a tight end in the block. But I think for the most part, moving defenders around and making sure that you have to have all those defenders in coverage instead of being able to rush as many people as possible because, the tight end's going to stay in coverage. I think that'll benefit the passing game more than anyone else.
Cody Whittington at Witty1 writes in, Eugene Monroe for competition at left tackle or no freaking way?
I think there is no freaking way it'll happen, but I wouldn't mind it. I was talking about this a little bit on the football machine about how, if you bite the bullet, right, and you just cut Matt Khalil and take, the $12.5 million in dead money or whatever, and you sign Eugene Monroe, you're probably better off. And Monroe is not necessarily a system fit. He's been a zone run guy all his life, and Sparano likes, more versatile and definitely meaner linemen than, your classic zone linemen. And, Eugene Monroe has been very injury prone, and the Vikings are very cognizant of what it means to be injury prone on the offensive line. In the last 2 years, he's had a lot of injury problems. He's only played, I think, last year only played like 320 snaps or something like that. But he's only 29. Matt Khalil has played, basically every snap, but he's played them very poorly, and he's played them without good health. And I don't know that, Eugene Monroe, if he, whoever ends up replacing Eugene Monroe, if he does get injured, might be TJ Clemmings, might be Austin Shepard, might be whoever, may end up being almost as good as Matt Khalil anyway. So I don't mind it, but I don't think it's going to happen.
So a follow-up question from Tim Clark at Tim Clark 65DN. If Sperano gets a good /average /decent season out of Khalil, what is it worth to re-sign him? Or should we just bail?
I mean, I think the Vikings would probably bail. I think Matt Khalil would be more likely to bail because he probably wants a new environment. And he has got a good season to bank on. But my guess is that he would be worth something like what Andre Smith was worth, which is $3.5 million a year. Would it be worth it for the Vikings? I don't know. I would probably it would be worth it to sign him at $3.5 million if he ends up getting an average season. But I wouldn't blame anybody, fans or the front office, from just wanting to move on and getting like a left tackle in the draft.
All right, 2 more questions. Matt Nelson at nmat71, hi Matt, writes us, how many more articles this offseason will we have to endure about Adrian's famed workout program?
As many as you click on, Matt. The choice is yours.
Exactly. You are the reason these exist, Matt. Just stop it. For the sake of all of us, please stop. And finally, from Judd Zulgad's Hoodie at JZ Hoodie on the Twitter, which Vikings player will have the most crying Jordan memes?
Adrian after fumbles. That's a pretty good candidate. Twitter seems to like hating on Teddy. So anytime there's a loss, maybe that. I can't imagine a defensive player. I'm going to go with Adrian.
Yeah, it's almost got to be Adrian. Maybe in non-game, like non-Twitter situations, Matt Khalil, possibly.
No, that's true. Yeah.
Possibly TJ Clemmings, if especially if he starts. Like if he gets a starting job at right tackle, then expect some TJ Clemmings crying Jordan.
Yeah, there's going to be a lot of TJ Clemmings crying Jordan if he starts, but it seems pretty unlikely because whoever wins the right tackle job is probably between Andre Smith, Phil Loadholt, and I think the left tackle job is Matt Khalil. And I think they moved Clemmings to the left side anyway, but it would take an injury to get TJ Clemmings there. And I think as a rule, we tend not to put the crying Jordan on injured players, which I think that's a pretty good rule.
It's true. That would be like a really rude thing to do.
Yeah. But yeah, if Clemmings ends up getting a starting job because of an injury or something like that,
the crying Jordans will flow as freely as Jordan's tears.
Exactly.
Yes. All right. Any parting shots? Any upcoming articles you would like to plug? I know we are about 2 weeks away from Training Camp Guide, 3 weeks away from Training Camp Guide, 3.5 weeks away.
Yeah, 2.5 weeks. Hopefully, anyway. Maybe take longer than I thought, but in the middle of writing it, I've already brainstormed a couple of new hashtag content ideas to make sure that every Training Camp Guide has unique content. As per usual, I'll still have the how to watch training camp stuff at the very beginning. That was there last year. This year it's updated. It's got more information about drills and stuff like that. It's got more. Yeah, it's a little bit easier to read. I cleaned up some passive voice and stuff like that. But I've got an updated beginning. Obviously, scouting reports are going to be all new to take into account last year's information and the rookies and stuff like that. And new articles, like stuff about thoughts about momentum or analytics in team operations, things like team culture and stuff like that. So I got a couple new features so that every Training Camp Guide is unique. Hopefully, we get this at 130 pages again. I don't think we'll get under 125 pages. I think that the risk is that it'll go over, which means I'll be doing maybe too much work. But that's where I'm at. So a bunch of new features. They've already been half written. Obviously, completely new scouting reports and fresh content, man.
So fresh, so digital, perhaps multimedia.
So multimedia, maybe not.
If words and pictures count as multimedia, then so multimedia. We will be happy to sell you that training camp guide on the newly revamped and reissued Norse Code website, which will drop next week after testing. It's nearly finished. Love the new design. It's made to look even cooler on desktop and work great on mobile, and streamline the process of any sort of commerce you wish to engage with us, whether it's buying merchandise, which we will have, training camp guide, potentially stickers and other goodies, or just a simple donation or subscription. We'll be able to do that. Plus, if you give me a little bit of time, I'll launch the website before this, our website will finally have the complete archive of Norse Code episodes. Yay!
Yeah,
plus,
that's not something that we've been able to boast about before, so I'm very happy about that.
Going way back to the SoundCloud days, which hopefully that account is still active. It would be a sad thing if those episodes just disappeared from the internet, but that's okay. We've got ways to recover them if we need to. There will also be some other cool stuff on the website. Wall of Fame for everybody who's donated, a separate Wall of Fame for everyone who's ever been a guest on the show, and links to their work if you're interested in reading some of the words that people who have said smart things have written. And that'll be at NorseCodePodcast.com, probably late this week, early next week. Anyway, my expectation is to release it alongside the next show. But I just wanted to update you all, remind you that Norse Code Podcast is not dead. The website, the podcast, obviously still alive. But in the meantime, you can check us out at dailynorseman.com. You can check us out on Facebook at facebook.com/dailynorseman. We are at NorseCodeDN on Twitter. Twitter account operated by our intrepid producer, James, who is at Big Mono. Of course, I am at Dusty O'Connell. And Vikings blogger extraordinaire and co-host of the Andy Lucan and Reeve Football Machine and frequent guest on the other Andy Carlson Network podcasts. Arif Hassan is at Arif Hassan NFL on Twitter. Once again, the one-time donation link for the show is paypal.me/NorseCode, and the subscription link is patreon.com/NorseCode. Please feel free to flip us a few bucks if you feel like the work that we do is worth anything to you. We believe it is. Even when we don't have amazing guests on, I can imitate a question asker, and Arif can imitate an expert about another team for long enough to execute on one episode. So
yeah, so Norse Code, good enough.
Wasn't it fun pretending? I had fun pretending.
I had the most fun pretending.
It's fun to pretend. So we'll be back next week with a little bit more, I guess, dog days of summer content. But until then, our formula is and shall remain: keep Teddy alive.
Norse Code is the official podcast of the Daily Norseman SB Nation blog and is produced with cooperation from Pompous Jerk Productions. Pompous Jerk Productions. Attitude with attitude. The opinions expressed in this podcast are solely those of their contributors and do not reflect official positions of the Minnesota Vikings, SB Nation, the Daily Norseman staff, or PJP. No information in this podcast should be construed as gambling advice. Please obey all local gaming laws.
Our formula is this. We go out, we hit people in the mouth.